In the early 19th century, something unexpected was occurring during the Spanish-American Wars of Independence. While Creoles took up arms for freedom, armies made up of indigenous people marched to defend the crown. But this was neither madness nor naivety. It was the result of centuries of a complex, intricate relationship that involved alliances, privileges, jurisdiction, and even nobility. And that explains why, in many regions, it was the natives themselves who resisted the independence process the most. In today's video, we're going to talk about the little-known role of American indigenous people against the independence of Spanish America, and how the relationships between the indigenous nobility and the crown were much more complex than people imagine. But before we start the video, if you like our content, become a member of our channel right now. That way, you'll have access to our group and to content like live classes. To delve even deeper into the behind the scenes of history, to understand how the Spanish created Spanish America, it's essential to understand the indigenous participation in the construction of this new domain. It would be practically impossible for just a few thousand Spaniards to subdue millions of Native Americans without resorting to alliances to facilitate the conquest. In addition to forming alliances with some peoples, such as the Totonacs or the Texcocans, the Spaniards knew how to maintain some of the old power structures of indigenous societies. Thus, while the viceroyalties had power structures very similar to European courts, they also had at the same time a parallel indigenous nobility and system with well-established powers. Thus, for example, even when Montezuma falls, several natives continue to govern Tenochtitlan, no longer as the great Tlatoanis, but still with the power of governance and taxation. And many of these rulers, in fact, helped the Spanish against other tribes. One of the chiefs of Tenochtitlan, Andrés de Tabia Motelchiro, even died in battle alongside the Spanish, trying to conquer the Chichimecas. And what's interesting is that at times the indigenous people managed to accumulate their own nobility, and also Spanish nobility, being nobles in two different worlds. We have as an example Nicolás de San Luis Montañez. He was a native and was the chief of Tula, but he was also ordained as a knight of the Order of Santiago. In Peru, Don Marcos Tincuatopa, who was of Inca nobility, was the Marquis of Oropesa, and at the same time, chief of Coquepata. The Marquisate of Santiago de Oropesa itself was created by the Spanish crown specifically to be destined for the heirs of the Incas through the female line, and others, like the Tula, the Duchy of Montezuma de Tultengo, created specifically for the heirs of Montezuma, who are still nobles in Spain today. And beyond these territorial domains, marriage was also an important tool for political integration. We have as an example the marriage between the Inca princess, Beatriz de Claracoya, and Martín García de Loyola, governor of Chile. Or even the daughter of Montezuma, Isabel Montezuma, who married a Spanish nobleman. Or even the conquistador Francisco Pizarro, who married the Inca princess Quispe Chisa. This princess, after Pizarro's death, would marry another conquistador, Francisco de Ampoero. Thus, it was within a system of privileges and nobility that many natives collaborated and accepted the establishment of the Spanish viceroyalties. But at the beginning of the 19th century, the imprisonment of the Spanish Bourbons caused great dilemma and unrest in the American territories. The royal family, which ruled Spanish America, was held captive, and a usurping government led by José Bonaparte was now taking power. Thus, in 1810, juntas were formed in the Spanish viceroyalties of the Americas. Juntas were formed in Caracas, Buenos Aires, Bogotá, Quito, Santiago, and Dolores, and all of them claimed authority in the name of King Fernando VII. As the writer Juan José Arregui rightly states, in no case did they deny their loyalty to Spain. Documents from that time show that Americans did not see themselves as part of a colonial system, but as part of a kingdom. However, this reality did not last, as they realized that the royal family would not free itself from Napoleon so easily. Among some Creole elites, independence aspirations began to grow, since they could gain a level of power over the territory never seen before. But this desire was not universal. The Creole elite of Peru did not have the same independence fervor as those of Venezuela or Argentina. In fact, the Viceroyalty of Peru was one of the regions most loyal to the Spanish crown. And, in the interior, the Peruvian indigenous people opposed the establishment of a republic, preferring to remain part of the Spanish Empire. We can mention as the most important indigenous leader Antonio Huachaca, who, when Lima fell to the independence fighters, even went so far as to found a new state because he refused to follow Lima's orders. The Peruvians were not against independence because they loved King Fernando VII, but rather because the Spanish monarchy ensured for them the system they knew, were used to, and felt comfortable with. It's no coincidence that San Martin meets with Bolívar in Guayaquil, and it's Bolívar who will fight against the Spanish troops, which were mostly made up of Peruvian indigenous people, and practically automatically force the independence of Peru. In 1824, the contrast was very noticeable. The historian Alberto Metol Ferrey gives the example that, in the War of Independence of Peru, predominantly white troops wanted independence, while mixed race and indigenous troops made up the royalist ranks. While the Buenos Aires army was under the political command of the lawyer Juan José Castelli, the son of an Italian doctor, on the other side, there was a chief, Don Mateo Garcia. Pumacahua, a member of the Inca nobility, was a leader of the royalist army. In fact, in 1780, he helped to defeat Tupac Amaru. The contrast between the two armies could not be greater. On one side, a descendant of Italians who, during the British invasion of Buenos Aires, had even sworn loyalty to the British. On the other side, natives from the Inca nobility, loyal to the Spanish monarchy. The defense of the empire was the defense of a world they knew. And even great figures in Peruvian Republican history were loyal members. Among the Spanish royalist troops, we have the example of Ramón de Castilla. Although he is known as the president of independent Peru, at the age of 15, he joined the royalist troops loyal to the Spanish crown, and he also accomplished impressive feats. After the Battle of Chacabuco, he was imprisoned in Argentina, escaped to Uruguay, arrived in Rio de Janeiro, and then crossed the forests of Mato Grosso, finally reaching Peru. After traveling more than 11,000 kilometers, mostly on foot, all of this just to return to fight alongside the Spanish troops. And the most interesting thing about these apparent contradictions in the independence process is that some of the peoples who most resisted Spanish domination were also among those who most helped the Spanish royalists against the independence fighters of Chile and Argentina. This is well presented in the article by Eduardo Cavieres from the Catholic University of Valparaiso, who points out that it was precisely the Mapuche people who most resisted Spanish domination in the 16th century, who, during the period of Chile's struggle for independence, fought in favor of the Spanish crown. In the article, Cavieres names events narrated in letters to General O'Higgins, in which Mapuche troops fought side by side with Spanish royalist troops against the independence fighters. And the Chilean troops report a true massacre, where both the Mapuche and the Spanish died side by side in battles against the Republicans. And several peoples participated in this struggle, among them the Mapuche, the Lafkenche, the Pehuenche, and the Atenche, who, together with the royalist troops, fought against the independence fighters. This struggle would result in 1832 in the Battle of the Epalafquin Lagoons, where the Chileans finally defeated the indigenous people and the royalists. And what these cases have in common is that they reveal something that the official history of Latin American independence prefers not to say openly. That independence was not a liberation of peoples. It was, to a large extent, a seizure of power by a Creole elite that felt strong enough to dispense with the metropolis. The natives, who were not naive, saw this clearly. The republic that the Creoles proposed. It was an unknown that challenged their titles, lands, privileges, and status. And for those who already had something to lose, an unknown is always dangerous. Independence was not a story of good guys versus villains. It was a struggle over who would have the right to rule, and the effects of this conflict are still experienced in Spanish America to this day. And had you ever heard about the natives who fought for the Spanish crown? What surprised you the most? So, leave your comment right now to support our work and take the opportunity to become a member of our channel right now. That way, you'll have access to live classes, our exclusive group, and the opportunity to dive deeper and learn even more about the fascinating Iberian history.